Combat achievements for a Phantom Muspah have just come out, and this video will cover all the tasks with some tips on how to complete them. First of all, there's kill count tasks for 1, 25, and 50 KC. This one is pretty straightforward, just kill the boss. Next, we have Versatile Drainer. You need to drain Muspah's prayer shield, which can only be hurt by attacks which drain prayer points, with 3 different types of prayer damage. The easiest way to do this is to use damage from a smite prayer, damage from a Sapphire Bolt special effect activating, and damage from a Greater Corruption spell. Some people were confused how corruption works. Simply cast the corruption spell, then attack Muspah with any attack, like a crossbow for example, and it will be corrupted. Corruption will drain prayer every 6 seconds, so use corruption at the start of a prayer phase so it has time to activate. There are other sources of prayer damage, but these are the easiest. Next, the Salamander kill. You want a black Salamander and Highlander Tar as ammo. As of making this video, Recoil and Thralls fails the achievement, but Greater Corruption spell for the prayer shield does not fail it. Be aware this could change in the future. As for attack style and what armor to use, treat it like a normal kill. So range style plus range armor against the range phase, and magic style plus magic armor against the melee phase. Range phase is straightforward, but the melee phase can be tricky since you have to be in melee distance to attack. However, you can just use the step back method. If a boss moves at the same time it attacks, and you have melee prayer up, it always hits a 0. So simply bait a melee attack like that, and then you can attack from melee distance. You can keep baiting melees tick perfectly like this. Note, the boss has a 5-tick cooldown for melee hits. You can also just move several tiles away to give more room for error on the timing. It can be awkward if the moving spikes are in the way. If you need to, just wait them out. It is possible to hit the boss during the teleporting special, but it's more trouble than it's worth. During the prayer phase, the boss attacks every 5 ticks while you attack every 4 ticks. So you'll want to click off a boss and attack manually every 5 ticks to avoid same ticking with a boss. Greater Corruption spell will help here, assuming it's still allowed since making the video. Keeping your HP high in case you miss a flick, the magic attack has a deceiving timing that can trick you into clicking slightly too early to switch to smite. Once you reach the final phase, it's a DPS race, as if a boss is fully trapped in spikes, you can no longer reach it with a Salamander. The boss places a spike under you when changing phases, so try to avoid placing spikes in the center of a room early on, as spikes will also spread out from the pre-existing spikes when it changes phases. You can even reset for a melee phase to lure it away from the middle at the start. Spikes spawn every 21 ticks or about every 4 attacks, so you can move away from a boss right before new spikes spawn to avoid your personal spike spawning on a melee tile that you need. Next is the 10 kill trip task. This one is pretty straightforward. It's all about the right starting inventory and not making too many mistakes. If you get a lot of supply drops, then this one is just completely free. However, if you get 0 supply drops, then it's kinda rough. It's easiest to go for this one passively, but if you want to guarantee you get this one even with bad RNG and supply drops, minimize excessive switches, go for maybe 7 restores, will depend on gear, and if you bring too little, you can always pray flick or even turn off augury during melee phases, since melee phase does 0 damage if done correctly. 2 divine range pods should be good, saturate heart if you have it, and a mix of brews and hard food. I would just use the ACB or ZCB spec to speed up smite phase instead of blowpipe or SGS for healing, as the chip damage and prayer drain when that phase goes on for a long time really adds up. When I did it, I had some bad luck on supply drops and wasted a lot of my food when I tanked the special at the end out of muscle memory from speedrunning, and had to resort to redemption strats. You can redemption a range attack by praying range until it shoots it out, and then switching to redemption before it hits you. It maxes below a 10 when praying range, so you can always safely redemption. Do not try to redemption the magic attack, as the next attack may come out too soon for you to get your prayer back up. Next is Can't Escape. This one is very straightforward, just turn your run off and only walk during the fight. Use the step back method for melee phase, which is if a boss moves at the same time it attacks, and you have melee prayer up, it will always hit a 0. Also position yourself closer to the side you need to be on before reaching the end of a room, so you can change directions in time. You can also just freeze the boss. The spike special and the teleporting special can be troublesome. These happen at 75% and 50% HP left. If range phase is first, then jumping special is first. If melee phase is first, then spike special is first. I recommend being near the safe spot before the teleporting special starts, and during the spike special make sure not to trap yourself. If a spikes plus melee phase give you trouble, you can consider getting the boss to switch to range phase so you don't have the spikes and the melee phase chasing you at the same time, or you could just freeze the melee boss. As you approach the prayer phase, make sure you're close enough to walk behind some spikes for safety. For the final phase, try not to be too close to an enclosed area of spikes, as the spikes might cover so many tiles that you can't walk out of it in time. Next is Space is Tight. This one is pretty straightforward. You just need to kill the Muspah while it's surrounded by spikes. So basically make a square perimeter of spikes completely surrounding him, covering up all the melee distance tiles. For this, simply get to final phase and wait until the boss is covered in spikes before delivering the final blow. Spikes will spawn underneath you as well as spread out from old spikes. So during the fight, try to place spikes in the center of a room so that they can be spread and cover up a Muspah faster, and avoid running out of safe tiles before Muspah is surrounded this way. Next is Walk Straight, Pray True. This one is simply kill Muspah without taking avoidable damage. So taking a range or mage hit off prayer from range phase, taking anything above a 0 from melee phase, getting hit by an orb during teleport phase, getting hit by spikes at any point, getting hit by Muspah's final special wave attack. Most of these are pretty straightforward, just pray quickly, avoid spikes, hide behind spikes for Muspah's final special wave attack. For a melee phase, you can simply do a step back method, so pray melee and make sure boss moves the same time it does an attack and will always hit 0. You can also optionally freeze the boss. Avoid having spikes and teleport special at the same time, as this can be dangerous. Make sure to use the safe spot during the teleport special. Next is Muspah Manipulator. For this one, simply do Can't Escape, Space is Tight, and Walk Straight Pray True all on the same kill. For this one, simply follow the tips I gave for all those individual tasks, and you should be good. Lastly is the speedrun task for 3 minutes, 2 minutes, and 1 minute 30 seconds. This one is heavily dependent on gear, but there is a fair amount of time saved in how you do a boss as well. For the 1/3 time specifically, if you have max gear, you can get the time passively, but it will probably take a long time unless lucky. So if you plan to kill the boss a few hundred times, you'll probably get it, maybe even in under 100 if you're lucky. But if you want the time sooner, here's some tips and strats. And I might make a separate video that goes more in depth on the 1/3 time for various gear setups if I feel it's needed. But I would say around 500 mil is about the cheapest setup worth going for unless you have some special restricted account and you really want it. First, let's quickly cover all the mechanics you should know for the boss fight. Make sure you know the step back mechanic, the boss will always hit 0, if it walks at the same time it melees you, and you have melee prayer up. For the teleport special, there are 2 safe spots on the red tiles, but the northern red tile will sometimes require you to dodge an orb. It seems to be RNG whether this orb spawns or not, so use the southern tile when possible and the north one as a backup. Be careful of a mage attack when trying to flick smite on the first possible tick after the mage attack, during the prayer shield phase. The animation and attack sound is a little deceiving and can trick you into flicking smite a fraction of a second too early. The boss changes phases after 100 damage on range phase and 80 damage on melee phase. Extra damage does not carry over between phases, and damage during the spike special casting animation and the teleporting casting animation and teleporting part itself does not count towards this damage. Use this to predict when to switch gear. Customizable XP drops plugin is helpful to predict how much damage you do. I will link my settings in the description for this plugin. If you Trident or Shadow from 5+ tiles away, you can hit the boss a second time before it transitions from melee to range phase. Also, the teleport phase has the stats of range phase, so always range against teleporting phase. Now some gear tips. A mage switch is usually worth bringing unless there's a massive gap in gear, like if your range gear is Missouri plus Tbow and your mage gear is a Trident in a Rims with no magic level boost potion or heart. For the ring, if you plan to spec up a start with a ZCB or something you can camp light bear to get spec back for the end, or if you plan doing multi-kill trips. Otherwise, use a Brimstone or Archers plus Seers. Venge plus Spellbook swap into Thralls can do a lot of extra damage, and is worth considering for some setups, though not good if you want multi-kill trips. Adding on to this, make sure you use Thralls, they save a lot of time. Some people like to freeze, but you lose a lot of DPS without Thralls. And while you're on Arceus, Greater Corruption is nice to speed up the prayer shield a little bit. Also, it's debatable whether ACB or ZCB is better, as you can spec twice with ACB, but ACB has a lower chance of proccing the Sapphire Bolts than ZCB. We can't figure this out with math because the Sapphire Bolt chance must be boosted during prayer phase, but we don't know how much it's boosted by, so just go with what you feel like. Now, some special time save strats. The end of a teleport phase goes unattackable for a couple seconds, and you miss the last Tbow hit just barely. If you Tbow from 9 tiles or more away, or use a Shadow or Trident from 2 or more tiles away, where 1 tile away is considered melee distance, on the attack that procs the teleport special starting animation, the delay in the travel time of a projectile delays the start of a teleport special, giving you enough time to get all your Tbow hits off. If you mess this up, you can just fire one Boba hit during the teleport special instead. If you Tbow from 1 to 2 tiles away when proccing the teleport special, you'll need to use a free tick weapon instead of one Boba hit because of how quick the teleport special begins. Depending on gear and what time you're going for, it may be worth resetting for a ruby at the start. It takes about 3 minutes on average to get a ruby while going in and out efficiently. You can also reset for a ruby and then do a Zag crossbow special attack for a guaranteed ruby, or just start with a Zag crossbow special attack ruby. However, if you have Tbow+ZCB, there is a tip later on for a better start strat that doesn't reset for a natural ruby, as it's pretty overkill for that setup. The boss teleports to the middle if you hit it while it's at 127 or less HP. Try to go nice and close before hitting it to reduce the travel delay of your attack. Similarly, for the end of a fight, try to be nice and close for the finishing blow. Go for the smite skip. I have a guide for the smite skip I will link in the description, and I will be making another video on it soon with some new tips and tricks for it to improve your success rate, which will eventually be linked in the description once it's made. You may need to tank the final special attack sometimes for the smite skip. It maxes in 80, so keep your HP high. And also, if you get the smite skip, you can always do a scythe hit at the end to finish it, since the boss will only have 1 HP left after the smite skip. If you have a Tbow and a ZCB, I highly recommend starting the kill like this. I reset for a range phase and start on this exact tile. If I don't deal enough damage within 4 or 5 hits, the phase change I just reset, as that's very slow. Once it phase changes, I move over a bit to avoid the spike, and I ruby spike with a Zag crossbow. If the spike misses, I teleport. Assuming I hit, I then run to the back of a room and Tbow a range phase. If you time it right, the spike will spawn away from you, but if you get to the back too early, the spike will spawn under you. Just make sure to move right after you Tbow and you will dodge it just fine. This method is really nice because it allows us to get all our Tbow hits off on the teleport phase because of that far away Tbow hit we used to activate the teleport special. It also ends with teleport special in range phase, so you can Tbow a bit more, and we want to Tbow as much as possible. If our damage was half decent, it should also reach below 50% HP before the boss switches to melee phase. So now our next Tbow hit procs the spike special rather than the phase change. So now we get a few more hits on range phase before it goes to melee phase. After all that, we finally get a melee phase, and that will probably be the only melee phase the entire fight, other than the initial one we ruby spec'd on. This allows us to really maximize time spent Tbowing, which is our best DPS. If you don't have a Tumikin, this method will be extra helpful for you. One last very situational tip, the spike special cannot animate the spikes if they are 1 tile away from you, or if they are 16 or more tiles away from you. Sometimes it's possible to position yourself so that none of the spikes can be turned into moving spikes. This isn't a time save, but if you're doing the smite skip, it's nice to not have any moving spikes to worry about. And that's all my tips for the Muspah combat achievements. I will include some links in the description to some example runs of these achievements. Once again, I might make a more in-depth video on the sub 130 time if I feel it's needed. We will see. Thanks for watching, and good luck on those combat achievements. Goodbye everybody.